Snow hammered against the convent walls as Sister Anneliese stirred the massive pot of Sunday soup, her face calm, but her hands trembling. Outside, boots pounded, SS officers laughing as they stormed in for their weekly meal. She whispered a final prayer, not for safety, but for mercy for the men who were about to die. Sister Anneliese had lived in the quiet convent of St. Marinov long before the war swallowed the countryside. The nuns spent their days tending to orphans, growing vegetables, and offering shelter to villagers fleeing the chaos. But by late 1943, Germany's desperation had pushed the war straight to their doorstep. Every Sunday, a platoon of SS officers marched into the convent grounds, using the nuns' kitchen as their personal dining hall. They treated it like a game, mocking the sisters, stealing their food reserves, and sometimes taking young boys, for questioning, never to return. Anneliese watched it all with tightening fists hidden inside her sleeves. Her resolve hardened even further when she learned the truth about the children who disappeared. A frightened villager, barely old enough to shave, had stumbled into the convent one night, bleeding from the leg. He whispered about the SS's new orders, to crush resistance in the region by punishing anyone suspected of helping partisans. The boys they took weren't being questioned, they were being executed as examples. Anneliese listened, holding his trembling hands while her heart burned with fury. That night, as the other nuns prayed for peace, she prayed for a way to fight back. The answer came when she discovered a secret hidden in the convent cellar, a crate containing vials of bitter poison left behind by resistance fighters who once passed through. The label warned that only a few drops were enough to stop a grown man's heart. She stared at the vials, her breath shallow, and suddenly everything aligned to the soldiers' weekly demands, their arrogance, their predictable routine. Anneliese realized that the kitchen they abused could become the weapon they never expected. And Sunday is only 2 days away. The next morning, the convent woke to its usual rhythm of quiet footsteps and soft hymns drifting through the stone. Always. But Sister Anneliese moved differently. Every sound seemed sharper, every shadow more alive, as if the building itself were holding its breath with her. She kept the vials hidden deep in her apron pocket, the glass cold against her skin. Only one other nun, Sister Margot, noticed her unease. Margot was older, gentle, and observant, the kind of woman who could read a room the way others read scripture at breakfast. Margot leaned close and whispered, "Child, your spirit is too loud today. What burden are you carrying?" Anneliese hesitated. She had not planned to involve anyone else. The fewer who knew, the safer the convent would be if things collapsed. But her voice cracked as she said, "They took 3 more boys last week. They won't stop unless someone stops them." Margot's spoon froze halfway to her lips. The sorrow in her eyes deepened, but her expression did not shift into fear. Instead, she placed her hand over Anneliese's. "Whatever you are planning, pray for strength, not approval, not rejection." Just a quiet acknowledgement that some sins became righteous when the world fell apart. It was the closest thing to permission she would ever receive. That afternoon, the sisters prepared for Sunday as they always did, sweeping the chapel floors, cutting vegetables, boiling water. The SS officers liked their meals hot and hearty, and any delay often resulted in shouting or threats. The nuns had learned to move efficiently, like shadows trying not to provoke wolves. But today, Anneliese was counting each movement with purpose. She checked the pantry twice, ensuring everything was arranged exactly as the officers expected. Familiarity was her shield, so nothing could appear unusual. When she slipped down to the cellar to retrieve the vials, her pulse thudded painfully in her ears. She lifted them one by one from the crate, held them up to the dim light, and studied their deadly clarity. She didn't know the exact dosage, only the warning etched into the wood. Few drops. She measured out what she prayed was enough, dividing the liquid into small jars she could carry easily. Each jar looked harmless, like simple water. She could feel its weight in a way glass did not explain. That evening, news drifted into the convent from a terrified farmer. The same SS platoon was marching back from a raid in the south. They had burned a village suspected of harboring partisans, leaving nothing but smoke curling above the valley. The farmer said he overheard them boasting that they would spend Sunday at the convent again, celebrating their victory. Anneliese gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. 50 men, arrogant, predictable, hungry. It would be the most important meal she ever served, as night settled. She stood in the empty kitchen, staring at the giant pot where the Sunday soup always simmered. Steam from yesterday's wash still clung to the air, making the room feel ghostly and heavy. She imagined the soldiers laughing, drinking, shoving each other as they crowded in. She imagined the children who would never grow old because these men walked freely. She imagined her hands, dropping the poison into the broth, stirring slowly, praying loudly. Her breath shook. She wasn't afraid of dying, but of failing. If even a handful survived, the consequences would be apocalyptic for the convent. The SS did not tolerate resistance, they crushed it with fire. But if she succeeded, then 50 monsters would never harm another child. She straightened her shoulders. The plan was set. The poison prepared. The soldiers, on their way. Sunday was coming. Sunday arrived with a cold so sharp it felt like knives slicing through the wind. Snow blanketed the convent courtyard in a silent white sheet. But inside the kitchen, the air churned with heat, steam, and the pounding of Anneliese's heart. The massive iron pot hung over the fire, already filled with vegetables, broth, and thick cuts of meat. The Sunday soup, the one meal the SS officers devoured with almost childlike excitement. Today, that excitement would blind them. Anneliese waited until the other nuns left the kitchen to prepare the chapel. Only then did she slip the small jars from her apron pocket. Her hands hovered over the pot as she removed each lid. The liquid inside glimmered faintly, almost innocent. Her breath trembled as she whispered, "For the children you took, for the families you broke, for the souls you never let rest." Then she poured. One jar, then another, then another. The poison sank into the broth without a ripple, disappearing, as if the soup itself swallowed it hungrily. She stirred in slow, steady circles, making sure the mixture blended evenly. Every rotation of the wooden ladle felt like turning the wheels of fate. The moment the back door slammed open, she nearly dropped the spoon. Heavy boots stomped across the stone floor, followed by laughter and the clattering of rifles. The SS platoon had arrived earlier than expected. Their commander, Obersturmführer Klaus Brenner, was the first to burst in. Tall, sharp-jawed, and infamous for his brutality, he tossed his gloves onto the table like a man entering his own home. "Sisters," he boomed, "we are starving. I hope today's soup is worthy of our celebration." Anneliese bowed her head, masking the storm. Behind her eyes, "'Tis ready, Herr Obersturmführer." As the officers crowded around, she ladled the steaming soup into large metal bowls. The aroma filled the room, rich, savory, comforting. Not one of them suspected a thing. They joked loudly, pushing each other in line, arguing over who deserved the biggest portion after yesterday's raid. Brenner grabbed his bowl first and inhaled deeply. "Marvelous. You nuns may be useless in many ways, but this is a talent worth keeping." The insult slid off Anneliese like rain on stone. She watched him take the first swallow, then the second. The others followed quickly, laughing as they devoured their servings. The kitchen echoed with slurps, boots scraping the floor, spoons clanging against bowls. Anneliese's pulse hammered in her ears. Would it work? Would it be fast? Would they notice anything before it was too late? She kept her hands clasped together so they wouldn't tremble. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Brenner boasted about burning the village, how the flames lit up the sky, how the screams carried like music. His men roared with laughter. Then he stopped mid-sentence. A strange sound left his throat, a mixture of a cough and a choke. He grabbed the edge of the table, his face contorting. His spoon clattered to the floor. Silence swept the room. Another officer collapsed, knocking over his bowl. Another dropped to his knees, clutching his stomach. Fourth stumbled backward, gasping for air. Panic exploded across the kitchen like shrapnel. Was ESTs? What did you do? One of them screamed before falling face first onto the stones. Their shouts turned to gurgles. Bodies thrashed, Chairs tipped, boots scraped desperately. Brenner reached out to ward Anneliese, rage and terror battling in his eyes, but his fingers barely brushed her sleeve before he collapsed, motionless. One by one, the entire platoon fell. The room filled with the heavy, horrifying quiet of death. Anneliese stood frozen, her breath shallow, her heart pounding so violently she thought it might burst. She had done it. She had killed 50 SS officers with nothing but a ladle, a prayer, and a pot of Sunday soup. But she knew the danger wasn't over, because soon someone would come looking for them, and the SS did not forgive. The kitchen was still filled with the suffocating weight of 50 silent bodies, but Anneliese couldn't stop moving. She pushed the heavy wooden door shut, her breath trembling as she secured the latch. The convent hallways echoed faintly. With the sisters' choir practice, unaware of the storm she had just unleashed, she pressed her back to the door, feeling the cold seeping through her habit, and whispered, "God, shield us now." Because the truth was undeniable. This victory had only bought them minutes, maybe an hour at best. Reinforcements always followed SS platoons. If these men failed to report in, a patrol would come searching. When they found their comrades sprawled across the convent kitchen floor, the sisters wouldn't be questioned. They would be executed. It's every last one. Anneliese forced herself to step forward. Her shoes slipped slightly on the wet stones, spilled soup mixed with something darker. She grabbed towels and wiped what she could, her movements frantic but precise. There was no way to erase the scene completely, but she had to reduce the shock, the horror, the signs of resistance. The next patrol thought the deaths were sickness or food poisoning. It might buy them more time. Her hands trembled as she reached Brenner's corpse. She knelt beside him, the stench of sweat and metal clinging to his uniform. His face, twisted in a frozen mask of fury, stared at her like a final accusation. She swallowed hard and closed his eyes with her fingertips, not out of mercy, but out of strategy. If the patrol saw panic on every corpse's face, they would suspect sabotage. But if the expressions appeared peaceful, natural, it might blur the truth. Just then, footsteps echoed in the hallway, the light, familiar steps of Sister Margot. The door opened slowly, and Margot gasped, one hand flying to her mouth as she saw the bodies. But where another might scream, Margot simply crossed herself. "Child, what have you done?" Anneliese's voice cracked. What had to be done? Margot stepped inside, closing the door behind her. Her eyes scanned the room, the fallen soldiers, the overturned bowls. Then she knelt beside Anneliese and whispered, "Then we must finish what you started." For the next several minutes, they worked in hurried silence. They straightened chairs, wiped surfaces, and placed empty bowls neatly beside still hands. As if the men had simply dozed off after eating, Margot sprinkled ash from the fireplace over the spilled soup to dull its shine. There was no illusion they could fool trained officers fully, but subtle touches could shift suspicion. Anneliese was glad she wasn't alone anymore. The weight didn't lessen, but it steadied. A sudden knock on the outer gate made both women freeze. 3 heavy strikes, not the knock of a villager. Not a wandering traveler, a soldier's knock. Anneliese felt her heart drop into her stomach. She exchanged a terrified glance with Margot. The bodies weren't hidden. The soup pot was still warm. But the air still smelled faintly of death. "God, help us," Margot whispered. Anneliese stepped forward, wiped her trembling hands on her apron, and headed to the gate. She forced her breath into a steady rhythm, though everything inside her screamed to run. As she opened the heavy front door, the icy wind rushed in, and with it 3 uniformed silhouettes, an SS sergeant, flanked by 2 riflemen, stared down at her with narrowed eyes. "Where's Obersturmführer?" he demanded. Anneliese swallowed, steadying her voice. "In the kitchen, Herr Sergeant. They're eating." She prayed the lie would hold long enough for a miracle lore for the courage to face what came next. The sergeant's eyes narrowed as he stepped closer, scanning the doorway and the faint shadows in the kitchen beyond. Anneliese kept her back straight, her hands folded neatly in front of her. "They're resting," she repeated, voice trembling but firm. The soldiers exchanged glances, a flicker of suspicion crossing the sergeant's face, but he said nothing. For a moment, the cold March wind seemed to carry the weight of eternity. The silence stretching between them like a blade. Behind her, Margot watched silently, her hand brushing over the crucifix at her neck. A silent prayer that the sergeant would not linger, that her friend would not be discovered in that moment of peril. Every step the men took into the courtyard was a countdown, a dangerous pause between life and death. One wrong word, one flicker of fear, and everything would collapse. Minutes passed like hours. The sergeant finally barked orders to his men to check the perimeter, his boots crunching in the mud, leaving the women trembling. When he finally left, the relief that swept over Anneliese and Margot was almost unbearable. They sank to the floor, leaning against the heavy wooden table that had borne the golden soup of death. "They're gone," Margot whispered, her voice a mixture of awe and horror. "They've seen nothing." Anneliese allowed herself a shallow breath, feeling the adrenaline ebb from her veins. She glanced at the fallen officers, the lifeless forms sprawled across the kitchen floor. The enormity of her actions struck her fully for the first time. 47 men, the elite of the SS, all killed with her own hands indirectly. The price of freedom had been paid in a currency she had never imagined she would wield: poison. Patience and courage born from sheer desperation. But the victory was not without consequence. The retaliation was inevitable. She already knew what would follow. In Posen, news of the deaths would spread like wildfire, and the SS would seek vengeance not just on her, but on everyone connected to the convent. Her heart sank as she realized the cost. Innocent lives would be lost, but the alternative, the escape of those monsters into the chaos of a collapsing Germany, was a reality she could not bear to imagine. The hours after the poisoning were a blur. Anneliese and Margot moved quickly, clearing evidence, hiding utensils, and ensuring nothing was left that could immediately betray the crime. The convent, once a place of solemn prayer, had become a battlefield of strategy and survival. They knew every corridor, every hidden passage, every trap that could be used to their advantage. By nightfall, the convent was eerily silent. The dead officers had been discovered, of course, and the chaos had begun in Posen. The wails of those caught in the SS's retaliatory sweep reached the nuns' ears through the cold stone walls, but they remained hidden, invisible, ghosts in a war-torn city. Anneliese could not mourn the dead civilians. She could only pray that somehow, somewhere, her actions would prevent further atrocities, that the shockwave she caused would destabilize the command enough to save countless other lives. In the following days, the world outside the convent moved closer to its inevitable end. The Red Army pressed further into Poland. The Allies approached from the west, and the Nazis' grip weakened. Sister Anneliese, once a simple cook and servant, became a shadow in the chaos, carrying a secret so lethal it could have shifted the balance of an entire region. Her resolution was quiet, but unshakable. She had acted, and she had succeeded. The cost had been high, the moral burden immense, but in that small kitchen, the shadow of destruction and the cries of innocence, she had forced justice in a world that seemed to have forgotten it even. As Posen burned, and the world outside prepared for peace, Anneliese and Margot remained. Two women, bound by faith, courage, and a shared knowledge of humanity's darkness, to turn the tide in a small corner of Europe. And though history would bury the incident for decades, their impact would ripple outward, unseen but undeniable. A testament to the fact that even in the darkest times, case one person's courage could echo across a continent. The sun rose over the convent. The next morning, pale and cold, Anneliese looked out across the snow-streaked courtyard, knowing the storm of war was far from over. Certain of one thing, she had done what she must. She had served justice, one bowl of golden soup at a time. The morning after the massacre, the convent was a ghost of its former self. Smoke curled from chimneys, the faint smell of burned oil mixed with the lingering aroma of the golden soup. Sister Anneliese, now moving cautiously, understood that the danger had only just begun. The SS command may have been decimated, but the surviving officers were already mobilizing reinforcements, and rumors of the poisoning would travel fast. Every shadow in the corridor, every creak in the floorboards, was a potential threat. Annalise knew she could not linger. The convent, once a fortress of faith, had become a trap. The hidden drainage tunnels, her escape route yesterday, now offered the only path to safety. She descended into the damp stone corridor, her feet careful not to slip on the cold, wet floor. The echo of her steps seemed to carry far, threatening to alert any patrols nearby. Each meter she crawled through the narrow tunnel was a heartbeat of suspense. Outside, the SS were searching, relentless and unknowing that their hunters had already become their prey. Hours later, she emerged into the woods, the air biting at her skin. The forest was dense, snow still clinging to the branches, melting in rivulets that ran down to the ground, turning the path to mud. Every sound, crackling branches, distant barking dogs, or the rumble of a distant truck made her freeze. Moved silently, instinctively ducking behind trees, listening, calculating. The forest that had been a haven for resistance operatives now became a gauntlet. It wasn't long before Annalise encountered the first patrol. 4 German soldiers, young, tired, likely conscripts, moved cautiously through the woods. She pressed herself against a tree, heart hammering, breath shallow. The soldiers passed. Mere meters away, rifles raised but not trained directly on her. Time seemed suspended. The slightest twitch could mean death. She exhaled slowly only after their footsteps receded into the distance, leaving her trembling but alive. Night fell, bringing a bitter cold that seeped through her thin habit. She had to find a safe location before exhaustion claimed her. Map, folded and tucked in her coat, guided her toward the abandoned farmhouse where the resistance had promised shelter. Each step was agony blisters on her feet, muscles screaming, lungs burning, but her mind stayed sharp, focused on the singular goal. Survival. Arriving at the farmhouse, Annalise was greeted by Potter and the other resistance members. Their relief was palpable, but the mood was tense. "They know someone is coming," Potter whispered. "We have to move fast, tonight. The SS will burn everything in their path to find you." She nodded, knowing that staying was death. Every passing hour increased the likelihood of being captured. Inside the farmhouse, plans were quickly made. Supplies were limited, a small cache of bread, water, and a few blankets. Annalise had to rest, but only for a short time. She mentally prepared for the next leg of her journey to reach the British lines, the only place where her life would truly be safe. The risk was enormous. Frozen fields, patrolling enemy soldiers, and the psychological strain of knowing she was a marked woman. The following night, they moved. Potter led, Annalise in the middle, flanked by the young resistance fighters. They traversed open fields, using every shadow as cover. Every flash of moonlight on her gray dress sent a shiver of fear down her spine. Spotted, there would be no mercy. The SS were relentless, and the cost of capture could be instant execution. A patrol appeared ahead. Cotter froze the group, signaling them to drop into the shallow ditch beside the road. Annalise held her breath, eyes wide. The German soldiers passed without incident, but the tension left her shaking. She realized that survival wasn't just about escaping. It was about calculation, timing, and nerve. Hours later, dawn broke. Over the horizon. The group had made substantial progress, but exhaustion weighed heavily. Annalise's body was near collapse, yet her determination remained unbroken. Every step forward was another step toward freedom and another step toward carrying the weight of the lives she had ended. The civilians lost, and the moral burden she would bear forever. The journey to safety was far from over, but for the first time she felt a glimmer of control. She was no longer serving golden soup to killers. Now, she was serving her own survival, navigating a world where every misstep could be fatal. The forest, the snow, the shadows all became instruments in her final act of resistance. Came in. And as the sun rose higher, painting the horizon in pale gold, Sister Annalise realized that she was not just surviving, she was defying an empire, one painstaking step at a time. The sun had barely cleared the horizon, casting a pale gray light over the shattered landscape. Sister Anneliese, now dragging her aching body through the frozen fields, could see the distant ridge where the British lines were said to hold. Every step was agony, her muscles screamed, her lungs burned, and the blisters on her feet felt like open wounds, but she kept moving. She was a shadow among the ruins, a ghost nobody dared pursue, yet every second felt like a race against death itself. Behind her, the woods remained quiet, but that quiet was deceptive. The SS had unleashed a manhunt, and there were always eyes, watching. Every rustle of a branch, every distant bark of a dog sent a spike of adrenaline through her. The golden soup she had served the day before now weighed heavily in her mind, not as a triumph, but as a haunting moral burden. 47 men dead, 50 if one counts the indirect consequences, and 200 innocent civilians paying the price. The numbers were a cruel echo of war's incomprehensible cost. Her companions Potter, Christina, and Jakub kept pace beside her, their eyes scanning the horizon for patrols. Potter whispered updates. "They've mobilized a search party. It's not safe near the villages. Stick to the forest edges." Christina, silent as always, handed her small sips of water and murmured encouragements in Polish. Jakub, young but determined, carried the map and silently directed their path. Each of them knew that if they were caught, the consequences would be instant death. By midday, they reached a narrow creek that had frozen over in the harsh March cold. Crossing it was dangerous. The ice could give way, and the noise could alert. "Any nearby soldiers?" Potter signaled them forward. One by one, they inched across, the sound of cracking ice making Anneliese flinch. Her breath caught in her throat as her foot broke through the frost, plunging her ankle into freezing water. A pain shot up her leg, but she dragged herself forward. Survival demanded it. Hours later, the group reached a small rise overlooking a cluster of abandoned farmhouses. The sight of smoke curling faintly in the distance made Anneliese's heart stop. She froze, fearing SS patrols or worse. Local collaborators had found another target. Potter crouched beside her, hand over her shoulder. "We wait until dusk. The shadows will hide us, then we move again." Every passing minute stretched into eternity. The weight of anticipation pressing down on her like a boulder. As dusk fell, the landscape transformed. Shadows stretched and merged with the ruins of barns and homes. The cold became sharper, biting through layers of clothing. Anneliese's teeth chattered, but she refused to stop. The British lines were closer now, just beyond the next ridge. Every step forward was a gamble. Every snap of a twig, every crunch of her boots in the snow could be the last sound she ever made. Suddenly, the faint sound of voices echoed from below. German accents. Anneliese's heart stopped. She pressed herself into the shadow of a broken wall, barely daring to breathe. The voices grew louder. Patrols, probably hunting the remnants of the poisoned command unit's network. Her mind raced. She had survived the soup, the escape, the forest, but one mistake now could undo everything. Potter signaled, pointing to a narrow footpath hidden behind overgrown bushes. It was a risk, leading through exposed fields, but the patrol had moved. Slightly downhill. The group followed silently, each step a careful negotiation with the cold and the risk of discovery. Anneliese felt every fiber of her being tense. This was not just a journey. It was a test of endurance, courage, and the will to survive the moral and physical aftermath of what she had done. By midnight, they crested the ridge. Below, in the valley, they saw the faint glimmer of British campfires. The heart-pounding fear gave way to a fragile hope. Anneliese felt tears prick at her eyes. She had made it this far. She had survived what no ordinary person could endure. But she knew the war was not yet behind her. She had only crossed into temporary safety. Yet in that moment, as the faint light of the fires reflected on the snow, Anneliese allowed herself a quiet, fleeting thought. She had acted. She had struck back against the monsters who had terrorized our world. And though the consequences were unimaginable, she had done it. She had survived. And now she was on the final stretch toward freedom, toward the Allies. Toward the possibility of living to carry her story into the world, even if it remained a secret for decades. Crossing into the Allied lines was surreal. Sister Maria, exhausted and nearly broken, finally felt the presence of safety. The British soldiers who found her were cautious but humane. their eyes scanning for danger as they guided her to a field hospital. Every step she took on their soil was a small victory, yet the weight of Posen, the convent, the soup, the bodies, the 200 innocent civilians pressed heavily on her soul. Freedom did not erase guilt, did not answer the questions that haunted her in every waking moment. The field hospital was stark, but clean. Its medical staff bustled about, assessing wounded soldiers and displaced civilians. Sister Maria collapsed onto a cot, her body shaking uncontrollably. The doctors immediately recognized her malnutrition, hypothermia, and exhaustion. "She should be dead," muttered one nurse, checking her vitals. But the nun clung to life with stubborn determination. Every breath was a testament to the strength of will forged over years of subjugation and suffering. Over the following days, the hospital staff slowly nursed her back to a fragile stability, yet her story was not believed. To most, she was another refugee, frail, broken, and delirious. But when Captain Harris, the intelligence officer, arrived to interview her, everything changed. He approached her cautiously, expecting the ramblings of a traumatized woman, only to hear her whisper, "I poisoned the SS command." At first, the words sounded impossible. A nun, a single woman, wiping out 50 elite SS officers. Harris hesitated, incredulous, unsure whether this was truth or madness. But as Sister Maria recounted the events in meticulous detail, the date, the location, the poison, the sequence of escape, the officer realized the magnitude of her actions. His disbelief turned to awe, and he contacted higher command. Verification took time. Intelligence reports had been scattered across war-torn Europe, and the Soviet presence in Posen complicated matters. Yet intercepted German communications, decrypted by Enigma codebreakers, confirmed the event. A mass poisoning had decimated the SS command in Posen. The numbers matched. The timeline matched, and the circumstances aligned perfectly with Sister Maria's account. She was not hallucinating. She had rewritten the local course of history with a pot of soup. The British realized the significance, but also the danger. Publicizing the story would inflame tensions with the Soviets, potentially expose underground networks, and risk backlash from German remnants. The decision was made. Sister Maria's heroism would remain secret. She was protected, not celebrated. Her file was classified, and her actions were erased from public record. Yet, she accepted this quietly. Recognition was not her goal. It acted out of necessity, and that knowledge alone was enough, even in anonymity. The impact of her actions rippled outward. The SS command's decimation destabilized Nazi control in the region, allowing hundreds of civilians to escape the tightening grip of the collapsing Reich. The chaos sowed by her calculated act bought time and disrupted enemy operations during my deed. Critical final weeks of the war. Her courage, though unseen, saved lives. Sister Maria spent weeks recovering in the hospital, reflecting on the moral complexities of her actions. She wrestled with guilt over the civilians executed in retaliation, yet understood the brutal calculus of wartime resistance. Every decision, every risk, had consequences beyond her control. Yet she also recognized the necessity of her act. She had chosen defiance over submission, courage over fear, action over helplessness. When she was finally discharged, the British offered her a new identity, a safe home in England, and security. Far from Poland, but Sister Maria refused. England was not her home. Her path lay back in the ravaged landscapes of her country, among the survivors, the orphans, and the remnants of those she had fought to protect. Her mission of service, atonement, and survival continued, not for glory, but for the quiet work of rebuilding lives and sustaining hope. By the time she returned to the convent-turned-orphanage in Cove, she resumed a humble life, cooking, cleaning, caring for children. No one knew the deadly secret she carried, the ghost of the golden soup, or the harrowing journey that had delivered her to safety. She became the invisible guardian, a woman of prayer and action, carrying the legacy of courage and sacrifice in silence. Sister Maria had survived, and her actions had left an indelible mark on history. But her greatest achievement was not the death of enemies. It was the preservation of life, hope, and the fragile moral balance in a world consumed by war. The impact of her choice would echo long after the war, quietly shaping the fates of countless lives, even if the world would not know it for decades. Sister Maria Antonyina lived the remainder of her life in quiet anonymity. The convent in Kov became her sanctuary, a place where she could serve others, pray, and continue the work of nurturing life rather than taking it. The golden soup, the arsenic, and the 50 SS officers were memories she carried in silence, a heavy, unshakable weight that no confession or prayer could fully absolve. Decades passed. The world changed around her. Cities rebuilt, borders shifted, children grew up, and new generations came to know peace. Yet inside the convent walls, time moved differently. Sister Maria rose early each morning, swept floors, prepared meals, and guided orphans with a gentle hand. To the outside world, she was simply a nun, humble and devoted. But history knew her as something far more extraordinary. It wasn't until the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 that the truth emerged. Declassified British files intercepted. German communications and eyewitness accounts confirmed the audacity and impact of her actions. Historians pieced together the story. A single woman, armed with nothing more than a vial of arsenic and iron resolve, had struck a blow against the Third Reich that no army could have replicated. Sister Maria passed away in 1977, her final days spent among those she quietly protected and served. Her grave was unadorned, a wooden cross marking the resting place of a woman who had changed the course of history from the shadows. The world eventually learned her story, and debates raged over morality, sacrifice, and the weight of wartime decisions, yet one truth remained indisputable. Sister Maria Antonyina demonstrated that courage comes in many forms. Sometimes it is found in the roar of guns, sometimes in the whisper of prayer, and sometimes in the careful, deadly precision of a pot of soup. Her legacy is not one of medals or parades. It is the reminder that even the smallest, quietest acts of defiance can reverberate through history, shaping the world in ways no one could imagine. On cold March mornings in Posen, if you pass the old convent, some say the faint aroma of vegetable soup still lingers, a silent testament to a nun who made the devil sit down for dinner and never rise again. History almost forgot her. Oh, but we won't.